Welcome to the Bible Savvy Podcast, a weekly conversation about how to understand, enjoy, and apply God's Word. It's time to jump into a new passage from the Bible Savvy reading plan.
Hey everybody, I'm here with Pastor Courtney and Pastor David, and we're in for another episode of the Bible Savvy Podcast. But first, David, you have a question for us.
I do, and you guys have no idea what we're doing.
I'm so nervous right now. I am definitely sweating.
It's good. We're going to do this more often.
We have a clue.
Okay, guys, it's March, and you may have heard of something called March Madness. Okay.
Indeed.
I know, Clayton, go ahead, tell everyone about March Madness.
Hey, I know this one. It's basketball.
It's basketball,
and
yes.
And it's where I fill out a bracket based on mascots.
That's right.
Ooh.
That's right. Okay, that's a good transition. So I thought, I love March Madness. Come from Lexington, Kentucky. College basketball is king. I love the brackets. I love filling out who's going to beat who and, who's going to end up as the champion. So I wasn't going to put you guys through like choosing your college basketball teams, but I did ask you guys to send me your favorite dessert.
That's right.
I have also put my dessert in, and I've contacted former Bible Savvy host Nikki Lucas, who's given me her favorite dessert, and we're going to have a Final Four debate over the greatest dessert.
Wait, so are we going to pit two against each other?
Yes, I
and
randomly
then pit
assigned
those two against each other.
And nobody said the same thing.
Nobody said the same thing. So we're going to choose there's two.
That's
it's going to be,
surprising.
we're going to choose two, the Final Four champion today, and then next week we're going to choose of those two winners who's the actual champion. So today is just the Final Four.
Oh, wait, we're doing it two things in a row?
Next week is the
Oh,
championship.
Oh, man, I wish we had prepped another
Way to,
bracket. Like, we could have done it. Oh, my gosh.
Well, I was like, how long are we going to do this
Oh,
banter
man.
question?
I love talking
You guys
about
are like, let's come on,
All right, so what did Nikki say?
All right,
is
so
is
here-
it chocolate and raspberry?
It is the tiramisu cheesecake.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
No, that
and
makes sense.
the randomizer has pitted that against the key lime milkshake that Clayton submitted. That is round one. Round two in the Final Four is
I went really general.
Courtney's ice cream. It's a classic,
Ice cream.
But
What
like-
kind of ice
Hey,
cream?
UCLA is boring, but
I did
people choose
qualify
UCLA.
it. I did qualify it because I said really good ice cream. Like I'm an ice cream snob. I don't eat cheap ice cream. That's probably
assume,
a bad thing.
We'll assume
but,
all the categories here are just the really good version.
bad-
of
a very
those
good
things.
version.
yes, like locally made ice cream is what we're talking.
All right, and I submitted my favorite dessert, which is churros.
Churros.
love
I
churros.
win every time.
Wait, are they filled
Flaky
with something or
cinnamon
just the straight up
churros.
churro?
Yeah. It's got to have this the filling. It can be, well, there's lots of ways, but
Okay, well now all
just picture your favorite churro in this
Okay.
discussion.
All right.
Your favorite
or
ice
just
cream, your
picture-
favorite whatever.
Or just picture all churros. When we get to that one, there's a
All right, so
Okay, so
it's
first
churros.
matchup. First matchup is the key lime milkshake against the tiramisu cheesecake. And so there's three of us. If we don't have to agree, we just have to have a 2 versus 1
Okay.
to advance
Okay.
them to the next. And we will have a graphic on screen showing this for everybody.
Okay,
as
so
well.
Ooh,
key
okay.
lime automatically wins. I don't like coffee flavored things, so there are like some tiramisus that are okay, but like I would probably not go for a good version of it.
And for me, I am pro tiramisu, but the cheesecake just ruined it. Because
Ruined?
that is like,
What?
cheesecake is like thick and weird, and again the key lime milkshake. I'm with Clayton on this one.
Oh my gosh. Well, I was going to vote for the tiramisu cheesecake because I'm not like a sweets
I
guy,
should have
but
let you
cheesecake.
go first. That I could have been the tiebreaker.
Like cheesecake, and I do like coffee
Would've
flavored
been
things
way
as
Power
I sip on
position is
my
the third position.
my coffee and
Yep, third child.
yeah. So I'm actually with Nikki on this.
Oh,
I would take the tiramisu cheesecake, but I'm clearly outnumbered here. So I think the key lime milkshake
Key lime
advances to
milkshake.
the championship
With you.
next
Yeah.
next
that's
week.
right. That's right.
But you're gonna have to bring your A game next week to defend the key lime
I
milkshake because
will.
I don't know how that could possibly win
Maybe you
against
should
any of
bring
the other side of the
the
bracket.
key lime milkshake.
Based on our recording schedule, that's not possible.
That might be hard to do. Okay, well, in the next, all right. So we've got our winner in that side of the Final Four. On the other side of the Final Four of Sugar Madness is what we're calling this. Sugar Madness instead of
Sugar
March
Madness.
Madness.
Sugar madness.
We've got ice cream.
Oh,
Apparently,
it's
very
my
good
nickname
ice
in
cream.
high school.
Can you do we want to specify the ice cream at all? Because I'm like,
I know.
Because it's going to go
I
up
don't
against the
feel a need
milkshake,
to,
right?
But
it's churro versus ice cream.
Churro versus ice cream right now.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. They're your two favorites, so I'm the tiebreaker here.
Yeah, you are.
yeah. And listen, I had a feeling.
So we each should
I had a feeling you'd be
case.
leaning one way, but I need you to think about a really good churro. Okay.
All right.
Not a bad churro like Courtney was thinking.
No,
really great churro.
We get there's a place we cater from time to time. Like when we have an event, we're here a lot. That backstage, they have churros and they're very good. Like they're chocolate filled and just I down those things.
And have you dipped it into like warm icing?
I can't say that I have, but I can imagine this.
But
Clayton,
yes,
Clayton,
like the
Clayton.
flaky cinnamon brown sugar.
Clayton,
God,
how do
goodness.
you make a key lime milkshake?
I know. Well, that was the whole thing.
With
It's like,
ice cream.
I'm basically already picking ice
Yeah,
cream.
but
I'm sorry, David.
That's irrelevant,
I'm sorry,
though.
David.
I'm so disappointed in the way this.
I am so disappointed that a
Conversation's gone.
churro is your favorite.
The churro is on the list.
Well, Nikki, Lucas, and I will go order our own favorite dessert without you guys.
All right. So
You
ice
all
cream
right.
do
versus
that.
So
I'll bring some
key lime
in.
milkshake
All right.
against
I'll bring
quote
some
unquote
in.
really good ice cream.
I'll bring some in.
really good ice cream. Okay.
But then we need.
Next
wait,
week.
is anyone else on the show with us next week? Because then, it's you.
That's right. Well,
Oh,
maybe I'll text Nikki and get her input,
Guess
and
who's-
we'll decide together.
Get her
Guess who's getting lots of ice cream this week, David?
So-
Every day I'm going to slip
my
some ice
gosh.
cream to David.
So
Isn't
tune
this
in
good?
next week if you want to know the champion of Sugar Madness.
right.
See you next time.
Okay.
So I don't know how to pivot to this, but we're going to. We are continuing in the book of Matthew. We're going to be in Matthew 13. Let me give you some context for this. The book of Matthew is essentially the story of Jesus, but then Matthew has taken different blocks of teaching, different things that Jesus probably regularly taught. It wasn't necessarily that he taught them all at one time, but he has collected them and put them into 5 collections of teaching that are scattered throughout the storyline of the biography of Jesus in Matthew. And those 5 blocks of teaching are meant to evoke the idea of the 5 books of Moses. It's Jesus sort of saying, I'm establishing the people of God anew in me, and I'm giving you the teaching of my kingdom and what that looks like. So we are looking at the middle block of teaching, which is a collection of parables. Now, parables are short stories. They have a purpose. They have a point. It's not just for entertainment. And so he is going to tell a series of parables that are all about the same theme, the kingdom of heaven. And when we read parables, the point is not to figure out every single detail. The point is to ponder them, to react to them, to wrestle with them, because they are meant to be provocative stories, okay? So people often are like, well, is this just supposed to make it clearer? The answer is not necessarily. The answer is it's supposed to make you engage. And so that's what we're going to try to do today. So Courtney's going to read. We're going to start in verse 24 and go to 45 or 46.
46. Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, "Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from?" "An enemy did this," he replied. The servants asked him, "Do you want us to go and pull them up?" "No," he answered, "because while you are pulling the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At that time, I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned. Then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn." The parables of the mustard seed and the yeast. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds come and perch in its branches. He told them still another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into about 60 pounds of flour until it worked all through the dough. Jesus spoke all these things to the crowd in parables. He did not say anything to them without using a parable. So was fulfilled what was spoken through the prophet, I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things hidden since the creation of the world. The parable of the weeds explained. Then he left the crowd and went into the house. His disciples came to him and said, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field." He answered, "The one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed stands for the people of the kingdom. The weeds are the people of the evil one, and the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are angels. As the weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. They will throw them into the blazing furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Whoever has ears, let them hear." The parables of the hidden treasure and the pearl. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. When he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it.
All right. The O and comma is observations. So let's look at these parables and make a few observations, find some repeating words, truths about God, things that are striking, different themes. What do you guys see?
Something striking to me was verse 28 in that first parable of the weeds. When the weeds prop up, the servants come to him and say, "Hey, sir, didn't you sow good seed? Like, where then did the weeds come from?" And then he just simply says, "An enemy did this." Like, to me, that was like a very striking response, because if I were just doing some farming, which is hilarious to think about, I was like, oh man, like, some wind brought in these weeds, some happy accident, or I planted in the wrong place. But he just immediately, like, the clarity of an enemy did this, and then responded accordingly, really hit me. That really stuck out to me in this part of the passage.
That repeated phrase of the kingdom of heaven is like.
Yeah. Yeah,
Over
it's
and
clear.
over
It's
again.
clear what the theme is there.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting when we talk about the kingdom of heaven. Sometimes we hear that phrase and we think of the place where you go when you die. That's not what the people in Jesus' day would have heard. So as we've been reading through Matthew, he uses the phrase kingdom of heaven. The other gospels, they use the phrase kingdom of God. And but the idea of the kingdom of heaven is not where we're going, but it's what Jesus is bringing. And so he's describing stuff that happens here, not something that's going to happen, in some other place. So that's probably helpful. I've got the observation here. I look at the wheat and the weeds, and the detail that they're kind of all mixed together. And then when the parable's explained, it kind of talks about this, right? Like, you've got people in the world, and it's not like, all the followers of Jesus over here and everybody else is over there, and it's kind of two different things. It's we're all mixed together, like people who follow Jesus and people who don't, people who are into God and not. It's all kind of we're meant to be mixed together, and Jesus is saying, don't try to disentangle that until the very end.
Yeah. Here's something, though, that I found a little striking about that. The servants ask, "Do you want us to go and pull them up?" And he says, "Because while you're pulling the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let them both grow together." And then he says, "First collect the weeds." So I put a little question mark with why the weeds first when there was concern, like when you're pulling up the weeds, you might pull up wheat. Well, if they pull up the weeds first, what's going to happen? Like all the roots are entangled together. It was just interesting to me, like the order of that. First do this, then do that, but don't pull them up early.
Yeah, that is a little hard to figure out. I wonder what
Just
that is.
a head scratcher.
Unless it's one of those ones where they are saying, like, sort them out first, right? Like you pull it all up and then you separate them after they're pulled up. You know what I mean? I don't know. But it is interesting that they if the judgment comes, right? Like if you try to uproot all of this, you're actually going to, hinder what you actually want growing here, which is just a surprising thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I noticed just the explanation of that parable in verse 41. He says the Son of Man will send out his angels and they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. So it was interesting that it was everything that causes sin and everyone who does evil. Because in my head I was picturing the wheat and the weeds is, okay, here's the submitted to Christ follower, and here's the weed is the one who is not. But there's this other thing of like, there are circumstances, there are situations, there are things about this world that cause sin, and we're going to take care of that too. We're going to get that out of here too. And my mind started to wander a little bit. Obviously it doesn't say exactly what that means, but I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah. You think of them as people.
Right.
And then the detail is explained as not just people,
right,
but
not
also
just people.
Other things.
Yeah.
I think there's just that idea of like, when the kingdom is fully here, there's not going to be anything or anyone that is wrong. Like there's not going to be anything off or tempting or evil about it.
Right.
You know?
Like I was thinking like natural disasters might be something that could cause sin, like unbelief, or some kind of like those things are, it's not a people, but it does cause evil.
Yeah, I don't know. I would assume that natural disasters won't be there, but what's included in that category is I'd have to think about it. I don't know what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because there are probably some things that you're like, well, I don't know. It could be around. It doesn't actually cause anybody to sin, even though, mosquitoes. Like that's a classic one. You're like, well, there's not going to be any mosquitoes. It's like, well, I don't know. Maybe we won't mind. I don't know. It's not technically sinful or evil.
Yeah.
It's true.
I don't know. I've said a few choice words about the wasps
That's what I
in
was
my
gonna
backyard.
say.
So do they cause sin?
One thing that I noticed, another one of those just curious questions, in verse 33, the parable, the kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into about 60 pounds of flour. I think something that can be confusing to people when they read the Bible and when you're doing this like deciphering dance, right? Where you're starting to say like, okay, well, I think I'm understanding the symbolism. I think this means that, and this represents this. Yeast is bad often.
It often is.
In the New Testament. Like, I mean, you look through it, like yeast is not good. But in this, it's good. Like it's growing. It shows growth and growth of the kingdom. But that was interesting to me to think like it's a positive here, but in a lot of other places, it's it's the Pharisees in other places.
Yeah,
and
even in Matthew, it describes the Pharisees' teaching as yeast that you don't want.
Yes. And so I think sometimes when you're reading the Bible, you can look at something and go, wait a minute, I thought I knew what that meant. I thought I understood that symbol.
Yeah, but in context, it might mean something different in this place rather than the others.
Yeah.
Yep. I think the point that detail's making, and the one before it, where it talks about the little mustard seed, and the little mustard seed, it looks so small, and yet as it grows, it becomes this huge plant, and it fills the whole garden. And the yeast is so small, but it eventually fills the whole thing. I really find these inspiring because I think of. We do church work, right? And I know lots of people in our church are like, look, I've worked really hard to share the gospel with people. I've worked really hard to kind of make a difference in my workplace. I've worked really hard to, disciple my kids or, whatever thing it is. And it seems like a small act, right? And it might seem like a really slow act, but the idea that this is how the kingdom grows. It's a lot of little stuff that spreads and permeates, and you look back on the history of the world and you say, okay, over the last 2,000 years, like what was the one big thing that made it so all these people know about Jesus? There was no one big thing. It started off with a couple hundred people and they told some people. And so then there were a few thousand people and they told some people. And over time, there's millions of us, right?
Yeah.
So there's something that gives me hope when I feel discouraged about the smallness of the things I'm able to do or the things that we're able to do,
This is a kind of a sideways observation, but obviously we're all decked out in green. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
The leprechaun came.
that literally made me think of like the spread of the gospel in Europe in general, but like even the Celtic plan of evangelism was very small.
Yes.
Seeds, little communities that started and they just did life together.
Yeah.
And eventually people started showing up and it got bigger and bigger and bigger and it began to grow and that's how the move of the gospel happened.
Yeah.
On a day like this when we're celebrating. So
yeah. For those of you who don't know that story in history, here's the short version.
Yeah.
St. Patrick. Well, this is not actually. This is a leprechaun.
But imagine.
This is
For our audio listeners, we do have
his name is Dave, not
His name
related
is
to this
Dave.
David.
Yeah.
But when St. Patrick went to Ireland, he brought the gospel there. It was one of the places that was beyond the Roman Empire. So when the Roman Empire started to fall apart, it was a place where the gospel was retained. And then a whole bunch of missionaries from Ireland went back across Europe and did what David was describing, started little communities, little monasteries and stuff. And the gospel kind of was replanted in Europe in all the places that the New Testament talks about. So it's like this slow spreading, nothing like we plan to do it all. It's like, no, we just went to the next place and the next place. And before long, this is what we got.
Yep.
It's cool.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Well, I saw in verse 35, I saw that word fulfilled. Matthew loves fulfillment. I'll point it out probably every time. And maybe because, again, we've done it with the kids in Epic. I think that's part of what I bring to the conversation here is a knowledge of what we've taught our kids in Epic. And we talked about that word fulfilled a lot when we talked about Matthew, because it's significant that all that we just talked about, for those of you who were with us through Leviticus and, all of these Old Testament books that maybe you felt like were dragging a little bit. This is it. Fulfillment. It's happening.
Yeah.
Matthew loves fulfillment. It's always my little note in the margin.
I think my favorite parable is probably this. It's really a pair of parables, but it's really the same parable. Is the one at the end of this reading where it talks about the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure in a field, and a guy finds it, and he sells everything he has in order to buy it. Or the other version is he finds a pearl. It's so simple, but just oh my gosh, that's what it is. Like, this is how we should see this. This thing that seems odd and unusual to people, when you get it, You're like, oh, everything is worth it, right? Like, there's nothing that's like, and it says with joy.
Yeah.
He sold everything he had. He's like, he's so excited.
Joy.
He's like,
yes!
I found a treasure. I will give up everything. And when you think about what would make you sell all the things you currently have in order to get it, it's got to be amazing,
Mm-hmm.
It is a little funny, though, that he finds it hidden in the field. So he finds it and hides it again.
Like, you don't want someone else to be like, hey,
you stumble upon it.
Hey, someone just dug up this treasure.
Yep.
Here we go.
I mean, do you though?
Well, but you also, it feels like there's a little trickery going on. Okay, so it feels like the backstory is this. He's got to buy the field. It's not his field.
Yes.
So someone can't know there's a treasure in here. Like, he's got to put it back in there to be like, yeah, it's just a piece of land. Not much is growing, huh? Yeah, whatever. Like, it's like a negotiating tactic. Like, if you realize you're going to buy a house and there's like a Rembrandt behind the wall that they don't know is there, like, you don't tell them about it. So
That's true. Yeah. That's true.
All right, let's talk about weeping and gnashing of teeth. Verse 42.
Yeah.
It's not repeated in this passage, but it is repeated throughout the Bible. When hell is described, this is in this one it specifically says the blazing furnace. It's talking about judgment.
Yeah.
But this phrase where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth is often repeated. So, hey, Clayton, is that a phrase of the time, of the culture, of is that something that was just part of the vocabulary at the time, or is there something specific that Jesus is doing when they describe weeping and gnashing of teeth?
Yeah. So if you try to say what emotions are associated with this, I think most people assume that the association is with pain. It's like, oh, I'm in pain. Gnashing of teeth is a frustration. So if it's expressing the like anger and rage you feel at losing or at being left out or excluded. So it's like so it talks about people gnashing their teeth at someone because it's an enemy they don't like, right? That they're mad at. So it's this sense of they're going to be people put on the outside, they're receiving punishment, and they're looking at the inside and saying, I'm angry and mad at you. So it's that feeling of ultimate total frustration.
Yep.
Which I know when we're talking about hell, that sounds like a mild thing, like frustration. But frustration in the sense of everything that you aimed at comes to nothing, right?
Yeah.
Like, not frustration in the sense of like, oh man, that the light was red on the way. It's like, no, everything you were about was frustrated. It was inhibited. Like there is something about the destiny of people that says it's supposed to be fulfilled. It's supposed to come to fruition. It's supposed to be something more. And your entire existence ends up in essentially failure and exclusion.
Yeah.
And so there's a rage and a frustration to that.
Yeah. Which really is even more powerful, I think, than the idea of pain. The weeping and gnashing of teeth, the fact that you could, at the end of this lifetime,
Yes.
be in a place where it's not pain because, God threw you into the blazing furnace. It's deep, regret
Yes.
and frustration and sadness.
Yes.
That's heavy.
Yes. And it's not to exclude pain from other imagery that goes along with damnation, but there is something about that we don't think about. Sometimes we only think about hell in terms of physical suffering. Like that feels like the predominant thing, but there is an emotional core
response,
to this, right?
yeah.
Like there's expressions of fear, there's expressions of anger, there's expressions of sorrow, of regret, all of these things, which when you think about human experience are extremely, extremely painful. And when you put that to, the ultimate version of that, it's awful.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's contrasted really well where you've got the image of the blazing furnace of weeping and gnashing, and then it says, then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. And then it goes right into the parable of the fields and the pearls
joy
and the
and-
joy.
Yeah.
The contrast is very clear. It's very, what Jesus is doing here is pretty masterful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I underlined, we're talking about parables. So I underlined the line that says, I will utter things hidden since the creation of the world. And then also in verse 43, whoever has ears, let them hear. I think sometimes there's confusion about what parables are for and why Jesus told them. And why did he not give all of the answers? Why are there these little mysteries, things that have been hidden since the creation of the world? And so the idea that if you have ears to hear this, let them hear, are the people who are ready to hear, willing to hear, and who are ready to contemplate these things and think through it. And, we talked about, the idea of an enemy did this in verse 28, how that might make them think well, who was that enemy? If you're thinking about it, that means you're contemplating it. You're more likely to come to the conclusion of something than if you're, preached at and told this is the law and the rule, which is probably where the Pharisees were. And then here's Jesus saying, let me meet you where you are. You know about gardening, you know about farming, you know about, baking. So let's talk about those things and then think it through in your everyday life.
They've done studies where they talk about, where they study how people retain information. And the counterintuitive thing is that when it feels the easiest when you're learning, the less you retain. So sometimes we feel like I'm not understanding it. And it's actually those times when you have to do some extra effort and it feels less satisfying, that those things you absorb better. So they can do it at the most simple level where it's if they make the font just a little bit harder to read, you actually you remember more from what you read than if you didn't. It feels awful because you feel like you're working so hard the whole time. Or if you pose an unresolved question for someone, well, guess what? After that class, they think about it for hours after that, where if it was all tied up in a bow, they'd be like, oh, good. And they won't think about it again.
Yeah.
And so it's the extra work. It's you move your muscles, it hurts, it's sore, but that's how you get strong. And so I think Jesus does that with his parables. He's like, I'm going to make you work for it. But in the end, it'll make a difference.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to the M's in comma. Let's talk about message first. If you're going to take an observation from one of these parables from this passage, how would you sum it up in a principle?
All right, so I really liked that first. I like all the parables, obviously, but that first one about the weeds and the wheat, it really stuck out to me. And that line of the calling out an enemy did this. So my message that I'm taking away is our enemy, the devil, is actively planting weeds around us to stop the healthy growth of God's kingdom.
Good. Well, I went through each one of them and kind of thought through what are the what's the phrase that sums this up a little bit more. And I said, God's kingdom is growing, justice is coming, and it's all worth it. So that idea of the sowing and the growing and the work and the small things and those little things that end up making big differences, all worth it. All selling everything, it's all worth it because the kingdom is growing. I think sometimes we can get caught and feel like it's not. And justice is coming.
Yeah.
And so it's all worth it.
My message is the kingdom doesn't come top down, but progressively permeates the world. So it's that it's the yeast parable. It's that sense of we want things to just come in that big, like we got a plan, we did it. It's that like slowly, imperceptibly, surprisingly, all of a sudden it's everywhere kind of way. I mean, it's probably the right way to say it, but it's viral, right? Like it's not the top-down campaign. It's the spreading in this way. And we see that all the time, right? Like with partners that we have and with different movements around the world, you realize, oh wait, it's not the massive organized thing. It's every faithful person doing this, and all of a sudden it's everywhere, All right, let's move on to one of the other M's in comma, meditation here. I'm going to just pick one of these short parables at the end because I think it's worth pondering, okay? So Jesus says this, the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field. All right, let's go on to the A in comma. Application. What do we do in response to this?
My message was our enemy, the devil, is actively planting seeds around us to stop the healthy growth of God's kingdom. So my application to that end was to remind myself who the enemy is and pray for discerning eyes to identify the weeds in the wheat. I've been struck by this idea that a theology that lacks a true enemy forces us to villainize people and forget who the real enemy is. And so I find it helpful to remind myself, hey, there's this kind of innate sense that I know something is wrong around us, because I can see the weeds in my life or in the lives of my family, and it's not a person's, it's not a person is the villain in this story. It's that, Jesus identifies it's the devil. He's the one planting these weeds. And so just reminding myself who that is and then praying for the discernment to see where that is. And even just, praying out loud for my household, walking around my house and like praying and just reminding all the forces out there that Jesus has the authority over my family and my home and this church and the ministry we're doing, and just pray for those discerning eyes to see like, okay, this is a weed, this is wheat, and trusting in Jesus in that process.
Yeah, so my message was God's kingdom is growing, justice is coming, and it's all worth it. And I kept thinking about, Clayton, I might be stealing your thunder here a little bit, because I kept thinking about the video you showed our kids in Epic that had this little spread of the gospel. It was like through these little lights throughout all the countries. We can probably link it in the comments on YouTube or something. And it was, I stood in the back of the Kids World Theater watching our kids watch that video, and I just had tears, because how incredible to see this tiny little seed planted that grew throughout all of these, countries and nations throughout the world. And that's what I kept thinking of as I was thinking of both message and, an application, is it's worth it to plant the seed. It's worth it to, do the sowing and the growing and to put the work into it, but to know that it's even the little small things. I think sometimes I will walk away from a conversation knowing, God's justice is coming, and I'll think, man, did I do enough to talk to that person about Jesus? And even the small things matter. Yes, you want to take those opportunities. I'm not saying don't take those opportunities, but just those little going out of your way, the little things are worth it. It's the little things are worth it. And so is, the sowing and the work and the things that go into it. So for me, the application was really considering those moments. When are those little things that happen? When can I just plant little seeds in my neighborhood, in my community, at the store, how you treat people. There's just little things that you do. If you continue to do them in the name of Jesus, they grow. And you see things grow in people's lives. You see relationships grow. You see that the kingdom is growing, and it will grow. It won't be thwarted. So. Yeah.
I forgot that I taught on this in Epic.
You did.
That's good.
You
but
did.
That video is actually
you had 60 pounds of flour.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. We did do it that way.
Yeah.
I can't believe I blanked on that. All right. So my message was the kingdom doesn't come top down, but progressively permeates the world. And my application is similar to yours. Mm-hmm. Do the small things, but then also have a long view. Right? Mm-hmm. So there's something about practicing the long view that's really important. It's not unlike investing money, right? That if you watch the stock market go up and down, you're going to be like, oh my gosh. But in the long run, you win, right? And so there's something about that with the kingdom of God. There is, I feel this, maybe this is because we're in ministry, but I think there are lots of Christians who look at the world around them and say, oh my gosh, this setback that the cause of Christ has faced, or, oh my goodness, the way that the world is going, in the wrong direction in this way. And I have to remind myself, wait. The way this ever got started, right? The only way we got to where we are, where there are enough Christians to make any impact on the world, is because a bunch of people who had no power just did the next small thing.
Yeah.
They were walking by a guy on the road and shared the gospel, and they saw someone in need and they helped them out, and they had children and they raised them to follow Jesus, and they did the ordinary thing. Mm-hmm. And I think about, so I did a funeral of someone last year, and they had served so faithfully at our church, and I was recounting just the ordinary consistent service that they did. And it was a behind the scenes role. It was something that most people did not see him doing. And so to say, actually, if we had 1,000 people like this guy, our church would basically be unstoppable. But you never saw what this guy was doing, right? This is actually the law of the kingdom. Yeah. That we're yeast, and we do the ordinary small things, and we permeate all sorts of stuff. And it's that makes all the difference. And it's not the big flashy things. Those are sometimes important, but in the long run, the most important thing is the small stuff over the long haul.
Thanks for hanging out with us. Join us again next Monday for a new episode where we'll be looking at another passage from the Bible Savvy reading schedule. And in the meantime, if you're not following along with the reading plan, check out BibleSavvy.com. Also, you can subscribe and leave a review on whatever platform you're listening or watching on. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Email us your questions or suggestions at podcast@BibleSavvy.com. Lastly, tell your friends, and we'll talk to you next week.